to go today, but certainly looking at the rhythm in practice, Aegis was standing head and shoulders above the rest.
He'll have chance when the session gets underway to really get into the general rhythm of everyone yesterday, and based on the conditions we might have plenty of opportunity to talk about that. We're hoping we're going to see plenty of riders straight out onto the racetrack, but just to bring you up to speed on conditions, if you weren't watching Moto3 FP2 moments ago, we did have a rain shower midway through the session, which has left this circuit sort of partially wet. Wouldn't say it's absolutely soaking wet. The rain certainly was easing off already by the time the Moto3 session came to a close. But it would certainly take a brave rider to even contemplate slicks at the start of this Moto2 session. Surely everyone's going to begin this session on wet weather tyres and assess things from there. And for riders looking to get their final race prep done on a weekend where managing your tyre to the end of the Grand Prix is going to be the key, this is the kind of session that Moto2 riders could really do without.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially one or two riders in particular lost the majority of yesterday afternoon. I'm thinking of Manny Gonzalez, who meant to say lost the morning session, or Danny Holgado, who lost the afternoon. Jake Dixon giving us a bit of an indication of just what the conditions are like here. It is pretty cold. Actually, the rain looks a bit worse than it actually is on our TV screens. Walking over from the paddock, it's more of a heavy drizzle, but certainly not something that will leave you soaking wet. You can see a few fans still braving the conditions out there. And, well, let's see. I think it will be wet tyres, as Lewis said, certainly for the start of the session. And as we saw yesterday morning, they dry up fairly quickly with the extreme high winds that we have here.
There was one rider who might be getting some flashbacks, Joe Roberts at the American Racing Squad. He was in exactly this session in these kind of conditions last year when he ended his 2024 campaign, when he high-sided coming through the southern loop. Did a lot of damage to his wrist, which he only really recovered from partway through this season. It's exactly the kind of session where there's a lot more to lose than there is to gain with going out there at the moment. It's very difficult to really say with any certainty what kind of conditions we're going to have for race day tomorrow, so who knows, we might have something resembling this for the 23-lap Moto2 battle tomorrow. The greater concern tomorrow really for all three classes of Grand Prix racing are the strong winds which are forecast for tomorrow. Something approaching what we saw yesterday, if not slightly worse, with the gusts potentially reaching as high as 70 kilometres an hour. One rider, though, enjoying the extra power and speed that the wind gave him yesterday was David Alonso.
David Alonso, third fastest at the end of practice, and super fast and consistent as well. Certainly one of the names that will be up there fighting for the podium if we were to base that on yesterday's practice session. Great to see some Colombian fans in supporting the reigning 2024 Moto3 World Champion. Also looking very good. And one key area that he needs to improve, and if he could do that, he could maybe be up on the same kind of level as Senna Aegis. It was a decent day as well for Tola, who was just on our screens. He was just narrowly outside 14, down in 16th, but first day here on the Moto2 machine yesterday went okay, went a lot better than it did for this rider. Danny Holgado has been a revelation of this year on Moto2, even the star of the second half of the championship in some ways as well, but he had a nightmare day, didn't he, Lewis?
Interesting, when you listen to rookies across all three Grand Prix classes, they say that what you need around here is just laps. You need to just do lap after lap after lap to understand how to truly master this circuit. Holgado cost himself a ton of laps yesterday with a crash at Lukey Heights. He also said that from returning to the racetrack after that crash, it took him a little bit of time, not that he had much of it at the end of the session, to rebuild his confidence. Only was able to put in around about 5 laps in the session overall. Those, of course, were all after his crash, which came on his first timed lap. So Holgado 21st, he was pleased with the limited progress he made, but it was limited progress in just 5 laps. And of course, so often we see the Aspar team putting in race simulations on Saturday morning. Holgado is not going to be making up any lost time in conditions like this.
Yeah, he really is going to be on the back foot going into tomorrow's race. Is Danny. There's a little bit of pain in his right foot after that crash up at Lukey Heights, but generally he is a-okay, which is certainly good to hear. Reckless was a little unfortunate to miss an automatic way through into Q2. 15th, one place off the top 14 yesterday afternoon. Started by just over 700ths of a second, but the reigning World Supersport champion, or the outgoing World Supersport champion, does have some good experience off Phillip Island. Maybe not in these kinds of conditions though. He's used to coming here in February when things are a little bit warmer and weather tends to be a little more settled.
cycling through a couple of riders here who don't have particularly fun and enjoyable recent experience of Phillip Island. Moments ago, you saw Marcos Ramirez, who crashed at Siberia and launched his American racing Cadillacs in the direction of one of our cameramen when he went down. He recovered from that in the end to take 24th place, if you can consider that a recovery. He needs to improve in qualifying one. Celestino Vietti, who we saw next, had to crash in each session yesterday. Even further down the order than Ramirez, 26th for Celestino Vietti. And for a weekend, Neil, or for a circuit where Luca Boscoscuro usually turns up here expecting victory rather than hoping for it, his riders way down the order yesterday.
Yeah, horrible day for Boscoscuro's men in that Speed RS team. So Lopez down in 23rd, Vietti a nightmare afternoon as well, all the way down in 26th. Far cry from the times when Alonso Lopez and Fermin Aldeguer were absolutely dominating the show here. You can see that the green flag is on. Seems to be in too much of a rush. I'm surprised.
Ready, boys?
Yeah, to go out and get some lap times. Thankfully, it looks as though Alonso Lopez will go out and assess some of the conditions. I'm assuming he's got wet tyres on, front and rear. Looks like it.
Certainly is a wet front tyre. I would imagine the rear tyre likewise. Up behind him, Adrian Huertas is going to join him out there and give him some company on this wonderful 4.448 kilometre Phillip Island circuit, 2 3/4 miles in length. Beautiful ribbon of tarmac. The undulation change. 1 or 2 bumps though that have been catching the rider's attention, particularly if you're on a MotoGP bike. It will feel like ice in conditions such as this, with rain having fallen and not a great deal of track temperature to help dry it out either.
See at least some riders going out and tackling the conditions. Daniel Holgado just needs to get some laps under his belt, and admitted that it took a little bit of time to rebuild his confidence after that crash in the ice yesterday. Practice. Salats is another rider that's been having a real tricky time of it. He didn't have a crash yesterday, but he had a big rear end slide, a big moment where he was out of the seat, and when he came back down, he actually tweaked his right shoulder that he injured all the way back at Assen during qualifying for the Dutch TT, when he had contact, I think, with Alonso Lopez, wasn't it? And that forced him to retire out of the Dutch race the following day. Watch out for the seagulls there. So
Antiquinez nearly wiped one of those out yesterday.
Thankfully, he managed to get out of the way just in time. But yeah, Salats was saying that they're not sure whether, well, he's going to try it out obviously, but he thinks it's going to be a very complicated weekend. Shoulder in so much pain. So hopefully he was able to find some kind of remedy for that pain last night and this morning.
Going the very scientific method of Fermin Aldeguer and his crew chief Frankie Carcetti just halfway up pit lane there, trying to work out how wet the track is. Just wipe it with your hand and just see how much water comes up on the palm of your hand. Fermin Aldeguer will be out on track in around about 40 minutes or so time when MotoGP are out there for free practice too. Some wildlife there was on the inside of turn 10 there as Adrian Huertas was navigating his way around it. This is the final sector now, the final couple of left-handers of turns 11 and 12. Normally in the dry in Moto2, you're taking this final corner in 4th gear at around about 100 miles an hour, 160 kilometers an hour, but very little lean angle for Adrian Huertas. He begins his first time lap of the morning.
It's definitely a session not to push to the maximum at the moment, you would say. It points towards nothing. We're already qualified and not qualified for Q1 and Q2 this afternoon. And as we saw last year, Lewis mentioned it at the top of the broadcast, it would be a lethal session when conditions are like this, as we saw with Joe Roberts last year. So everyone will just be keen to stay out of trouble. Doesn't seem quite as blustery as it was yesterday, Lewis. And we have to say, during the MotoGP riders reviews yesterday afternoon, there was quite a lot of talk from MotoGP riders that maybe we would have a bit of a 2023 situation. Obviously, the forecast with big gusts of wind, which is believed to be the case for tomorrow. A few riders were saying they might actually prefer to have the main race today, but it's as though we're going ahead with the original scheduled sprint, which will be taking place at 3 p.m. local time as always. We have our 3 Grand Prix races on Sunday, but yeah, let's see how the conditions are. At least tomorrow it is supposed to be dry. It is supposed to be a good deal warmer than it has been yesterday and today as well, so that could well play in our favour.
yeah, the decision on whether the Grand Prix was to be shifted from Sunday to Saturday, certainly made by people way above my pay grade, but you would imagine if that decision were to be taken, it would have been taken by now. We got news on the Friday night, didn't we, a couple of years ago. In 2023, it's not quite as simple as just saying, okay, you're going to do twice the distance tomorrow afternoon, boys. Go out there and race. Plenty of other things that need to be organised, put in place. Not least, all the broadcasters need to be informed to be able to modify their TV schedules for a Grand Prix rather than a sprint. So we will be sprinting this afternoon over 13 laps, 3 p.m. local time. You're everyone aware of the time difference. We're coming to 9:30 at the moment here as the red flag comes out in this Moto2 practice session, just as Alonso Lopez is about to complete his lap. No indications at the moment on our screens as to the cause of that.
We did have some wildlife on the track. No indications that someone has crashed. We didn't see any yellow flags.
Saw something down into turn 10 when Huertas was coming around, but we'll get further confirmation, I'm sure, very, very shortly. Some indication. We've certainly not had any notice of a rider crashing in this session, which is obviously your first fear when a red flag comes out, but there is other wildlife that's on the racetrack. Marshals will immediately inform race direction, and generally when that happens, for the safety of not least the riders, but also the animal in question, they bring a halt to the session, just as Ethan Guevara and Aaron Canet were on the verge of going out onto the racetrack. They're now having to wheel their bikes the wrong way down pit lane. Of course, if you go through a red light in these sessions, you're likely to cop a penalty too.
The red flag just in time. They would have had to have done an odd lap to come all the way back in again. Which is what has happened, but this being Phillip Island, wildlife can sometimes have a bit of an impact on racing conditions. We saw some seagulls precariously close to the exit of pit lane whenever Lopez was exiting. He's the first rider to do so in this session.
Having a bit of fun there, I think, with his team, who are pushing his frantic Alex back towards the box. Give me a push, guys, come on. Won't wait all day. Cadet is now on his way back to the box. Here he is. He's certainly seeing the lighter, funny side of a false start to his morning's action. So 5 minutes completed in this Moto2 pre-practice 2 session. Clock is stopped, of course. Oh, and only one that time on the board. Adrian Huertas, who put in a 1:49.750. So we're thick end of 20 seconds down on what we were doing yesterday in slightly warmer and much drier conditions. Celestino Vietti and Luca Boscascoro are also able to share a bit of a joke, which is something of a surprise given how their Fridays went. Crash in either session for Vietti. Huertas now informing the team of what he saw. Whatever the cause of the red flag, the session is restarting in a minute and a half time. 9:34 local time. We'll be back up and running. We do see some seagulls once again making their way into rather dangerous surroundings. Exit of pit lane. So this delay, this halt to proceedings will be a rather short one. In just over 60 seconds, we'll be back up and running.
I've had red flags in previous years for, I think, geese crossing the track up around the hay shed.
Yeah.
Seeing quite a lot of seagulls down by turn 1. There's one actually still on at the pit lane exit. No word as of yet as to why we've had this red flag, but it looks as though we didn't have any crashes. So we speculate at this present time, but the fact that we're going to be getting back up and running again very, very soon indicates that it was nothing too serious. So yeah, 1 minute or less than 1 minute, and we'll be back underway again. Spider here, Alonso Lopez will get another chance to go back out and refine some of his good feeling, some of his confidence, even if it is in wet conditions here. Good to see that despite the rain this morning, despite the slightly gloomy conditions at some point, fans have still come through the turnstiles in their droves this morning.
Well, we haven't had any information officially from us, but we thank our former colleague Matt Dunn, who is down in pit lane in his role with Mark. But yes, we believe that Adrian Huertas is connected with some wildlife out on the racetrack. We did see him gesturing to his team that he had seen or hit something. And, yeah, we have seen some smartphone footage from down in pit lane of Huertas's motorcycle, which is in some places slightly different colour than when he left the pit lane earlier on in the morning. So unofficial information, but that is what we understand to be the cause of the stoppage. Some information from race direction too, that it was indeed a stray bird, which unfortunately might now be a Monty Python, not an ex-pigeon, but an ex-seagull potentially. That's met a rather grisly end in this Moto2 session. Those are the perils of a circuit like this, in a surrounding like this. It's a danger to the riders too, as we make light of the Andrea Iannone famous incident from 10 years ago on jump end to MG, but well, you could do you some damage if you hit it straight on, but of course it could potentially cause you to crash and do some further damage too. But conditions such as this, and given what we're dealing with, it's not an easy kind of situation to police, is it?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, how do you stop wildlife coming onto the track when we're so close to the track, so close to the sea, I should say? Is it a case of trying to build fences so big, but if they're birds, they can just fly over those fences, surely? So, yeah, it's
got a major advantage over the rest of us.
I think of a major solution that could eradicate that problem, to be honest. Has been something that's affected racing here. Go back through the history of Phillip Island and World Superbikes a couple of times. Colin Edwards getting smashed in the face back in the mid-90s on his way down towards turn 1. So Huertas's mechanics are on the situation. Some bodywork has potentially been what I just making some minimum repairs. Didn't get any shots of exactly what happened. Still waiting full confirmation here, but I see that does seem as though that is the reason for the red flag.
I do wonder whether it was into turn 10, because of course it was a right-hander that Huertas would have been going through, leaned over on his right-hand side, and certainly the footage that we've seen on the front right corner as the rider looks of the bike, where he's connected with something. So some unforeseen repairs now going on at Italtrans to enable Huertas to rejoin the session. Sun is now out here at Phillip Island. That's a hint of irony, given the weather that we were experiencing around about 20 minutes ago, which will hopefully help in drying this track out as Chip Dixon now makes his way into turn 1. Feels he's in touch, doesn't he? Perhaps not the outright fastest yesterday. Certainly was the fastest Bosco-Scuro. The Bosco inside the top 7 yesterday was Dixon. Just after a little bit of better turning on board his Bosco-Scuro to close the gap to the likes of Moreira, Aegis and Alonso.
Yeah, there was definitely a bit of a time shift in enthusiasm, I feel, for what was possible here after yesterday's run from Jake Dixon on Thursday, who was full of beans. Pretty confident, thinking that the Bosco-Scuro would be a match for anyone around these curves, as it has been in years gone by. But as Lewis said yesterday, he said there was just a bit of a lack of turning generally, and quite able to live the likes of Senna Aegis over a longer run, but still very much, I would say, in the podium. I think you could probably say that Senna Aegis was a bit clear of the rest of the field when we were looking at the longer run at the start of the practice session. Maybe in the first 2/3 of the session when riders were putting in 13, 14 lap runs. Looking at riders that could do lap times in 1:30s, which was an exceptionally fast pace, essentially close to lap record pace. Aegis was able to do 7 laps in those 1:30s during his longer run yesterday afternoon. So was able to do 4. Then I think we had Diogo Moreira and Aaron Canet both on 1 apiece. We also had Jake Dixon, who was doing pretty consistent, very low 1:31s. So he wasn't that far off the back of the likes of Moreira and Canet. But from what I could see, it looked as though Aegis is probably in the strongest position in terms of race rhythm. Then we have David Alonso, and then it's maybe 3 or 4 riders fighting for that final podium place.
And one name that we haven't mentioned at any stage in that analysis is the championship leader, Manu Gonzalez, who, if you weren't with us yesterday, had a big crash coming through the hay shed in pre-practice 1, and then also had a get-off coming into the Miller hairpin turn 4 late in the session. Turn 4, much slower crash than he had in the morning, but another dent to the confidence in his longer run. I'm using quote marks when I say that, because it was only 8 laps that he did at the start of the session. The best lap we saw from Gonzalez was a 1:31.3, where, as you say, Aegis, his teammate, did 7 laps under a 1:31 altogether. So there's no question that in terms of confidence, in terms of outright pace, Manu Gonzalez has some catching up to do. He's challenged for the podium tomorrow.
Yeah, big catching up to do for Manu Gas, and I'm pretty sure he will be absolutely despairing at the current conditions that we have, because having missed a good chunk of FP1, he is really on the back foot. Now we've lost this session to the conditions pretty much. Yeah, Gonzalez is going to be going into qualifying with a good deal less experience and a good deal less speed, I think, than his rivals over a long race distance.
He was trying to look at the sector time yesterday to see where perhaps he was losing most of his time. Generally in sector 3, really. That was where Aegis was making a lot of his time. The third sector here in Phillip Island takes in a lot of the fast stuff through the hay shed and up and over Lukey Heights. Aegis, in a sector that is only 17 seconds long on the Moto2 bike, was 2/10 near enough quicker than anybody else on the racetrack. And when you compare him to Gonzalez, he was a quarter of a second clear of Manu Gas, and Gonzalez in the final sector too was also losing a quarter of a second relative to Alonso, who we saw had a big step over the rest in that fourth sector. In fact, if you put Gonzalez's fourth sector against the rest, he was only 13th fastest through there. He's in touch near enough through sectors 1, and particularly in sector 2, he's as fast as anybody through that second sector. But in the final half of the lap, particularly through, I guess, the faster left-handers of the final sector, and I guess perhaps with a little knock to the confidence through the high-speed corners coming through the hay shed, Gonzalez still leaving a little bit of time on the table there.
Yeah, understandable if you have had a big crash through the hay shed. I believe it's around 120 miles an hour that he tipped off at yesterday morning, and I think you're going to maybe be holding your breath slightly through some of the faster turns on this track. And yeah, turns 11, turns 12, not for the faint-hearted. Yesterday, David Alonso was saying that the wind was so strong, buffeting riders around, that it was almost like you were dancing on the bike. Oh, as Dixon crashes down into the MG hairpin down at turn number 10. Thankfully, that is at relatively low speed. Nick Dixon has had a messy start to his Saturday morning here at Phillip Island.
So easily done in conditions such as this, very sharply downhill into turn 10. The camera there does it a little bit of justice, but if you stood trackside, you'd certainly get a better example or a better idea of just how far you're dropping into there. And dropping the bike altogether was Dixon on the front end. You can see there how quickly the front end washed away. Classic wet weather crash that for the 96, who does still currently lead this session by the thick end of 2 seconds, so perhaps taking slightly more risks than most of the field out there.
Yeah, you could maybe say that. It certainly looked as though he was pushing on, coming on Lukey Heights, and just kicking out, sliding somewhat. But it looks as though his session is far from over, and hopefully he'll get that bike back into the paddock soon enough. As I was saying, Alonso said that the wind was buffeting riders around so much that it felt like he was kind of dancing on the bike. He was having to adjust his body position a lot to deal with it moving. That was especially pronounced, I think, through the final double lefts, also through turn 1 as well. Pecco Bagnaia was actually saying in his debrief yesterday that he felt that the wind was pretty much on the limit yesterday of what was just about safe on a MotoGP machine. It doesn't seem to be quite as blustery at the moment here, which is certainly a positive. As Lewis has pointed out, we have some sunshine now. You can see the blue skies above Manu Gonzalez, and with the wind here, it doesn't really take a good deal of time to fire.
Well, David Alonso said yesterday that with the wind, a tailwind down the main straight, he was doing 300 kilometers an hour down the main straight, but he said it felt like 350 with the wind pushing him down the Gardner Straight. But of course, you do then have a tailwind, whether it's a tailwind or a headwind, down the main straight. That then becomes a crosswind into the first corner when you're tipping it in the dry here at around about 165 kilometers an hour, which makes it so easy just to wash the front away. If you get caught by a gust in the middle of that first corner, you're absolutely powerless to do anything about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was the one area of the track where David Alonso was really struggling down into turn 1. He said he was losing so much time through there. If you look at sector 1, he was about 3/10 slower in that sector alone than the likes of Diogo Moreira or Jake Dixon and Aegis.
He was 21st out of the 28 riders through sector 1.
Yeah, so still trying to understand exactly how to run the best line through that particular corner. If he manages to do that today in qualifying, then I think Alonso will certainly step up tomorrow and be in the running for the race win. I'm just going to say this. We mentioned that AGS Alonso looked a little bit better off in terms of rhythm and the likes of Canet and Moreira. Judging by how Moreira develops over a race weekend, if he's that fast on a Friday, do not be surprised to see him make a big step forward today when we eventually get dry conditions and in the race tomorrow, because that's just the way he rolls. He always manages to pick up his pace as the weekend progresses. Don't be surprised to see Moreira in the victory fight tomorrow either.
Yeah, we know how tenacious Moreira is and just how hard he pushes in the Grand Prix itself. You just know whatever happens, he's going to make a step forward when the incentive of points, podiums, and even a world championship is on the line for Diogo Moreira. Just how crucial was that late Q2 lap for the Brazilian in Indonesia, when it looked like he was pace, but it looked like David Alonso had pole position bought and paid for on that particular Saturday afternoon. Moreira had other ideas, and that set the stage ready for him to lead Manu Gonzalez from the front in the Mandalika battle, a battle that Manu Gonzalez was unable to get back on terms with him in. Of course, he was then disqualified from the race, and that is why we are in such a intense and thrilling position in the World Championship with 4 races to go. Still 4, potentially 5 if you're particularly optimistic or you're a Jake Dixon supporter. In terms of the World Championship, Dixon's 59 points off Manu Gonzalez. Barry Baltus still in contention, 43 points back, but has to start winning fast if he's to close that advantage down. Canet, and he's 33 points back after salvaging 3rd from 21st on the grid in Indonesia, promoted of course by Gonzalez's disqualification. Moreira now just 9 points back after taking his victory and taking a maximum 25-point gap out of Gonzalez from 34 points down to 9. Which is why Gonzalez was under so much pressure before he even arrived here in Phillip Island. Pressure that has intensified with his tough Friday.
I've said so often this year that Manu Gonzalez is pretty unflappable. He did show that yesterday when he jumped up in a very solid top 5 time at the end of practice to solidify his place in Q2 tomorrow. The race rhythm will still come, but there's no question he will be under all sorts of pressure here this weekend in slightly unpredictable conditions. When you're trying to defend a bit of a championship lead, it really cannot be the most ideal of circumstances, but I don't think Manu Gonzalez can really have that mindset anymore of defending a championship lead. He just needs to go out and start attacking again. Arguably, he hasn't really been doing that so much in the last 5 or 6 races.
As mentioned yesterday, Diogo Moreira has beaten Manu Gonzalez in 5 of the last 6 races. The only race where Gonzalez beat Moreira since the summer break was in Barcelona, when Moreira plummeted down the order in the latter stages. Whether that was Gonzalez just not being as fast as Moreira, or whether that was Gonzalez just playing the championship game and just recognising that, given how far back Moreira was, he was 60 points back when we arrived in Austria midway through August, that he didn't really need to worry about Moreira as a major title threat at that stage. He was more focused on Aaron Canet. That will certainly have changed now, with Moreira just 9 points behind him. As Jake Dixon's spell on top is finally ended. Dixon, as you can see there on screens, is back up and running and potentially going to take the top spot back again. It's Guevara for the Blue Crew Pramac squad on a 1:41.102. Jake Dixon in second. Achi, who we saw up inside the top 6 yesterday, his best Friday so far in Moto2 third. Ivan Artola and Alonso Lopez. And if you watched us in Austin, you won't be surprised to learn that in these slightly iffy wet conditions, we have 4 Boscoscuros in the top 5.
They're still we're near dry enough to attempt to go out on slick tyres. Tyres are the order of the day here. It's absolutely right. We've had wet conditions this year. Boscoscuros really have risen to the top. We've witnessed in Austin where they locked out the podium 4 times in Moto2 history that they've managed to do that. Dixon has proven that he's right back up in the running. 2 interesting stories and rumours emerging last night in paddock regards to the Mark VDS team. It does seem as though Dixon's current crew chief, Luciano Castro, may well be on his way out of that squad next year. Aaron Canet, Dennis Onju, obviously going to be an all-new rider lineup in Mark VDS colours next year. And I saw Sky Italia reporting that Norman Rank, formerly High Brewers crew chief during his victorious Moto2 campaign last year, currently working with Harrison Boyd, PJ Motor Frinza MSI squad. Still Norman might be moving across to work with Aaron Canet.
And two characters I'm looking forward to seeing work together.
Two characters, full stop.
Yeah.
Exactly. I hope Marina Rossi, the coordinator of MotoVDS, has plenty of energy, plenty of patience to try and control that pair for sure. But yeah, Norman confirmed that this morning that he will be going to VDS next year to work with Canet. And yeah, you'd have to say, not just Norman's experience with working in the Moto2 category, working obviously with Guru successfully, showed that he could be a World Championship winning crew chief, but also just his knowledge of the Guru chassis. He could show last year at Guru with a quite different setting to what the other Guru riders were using, could be so successful and could really use his own riding style. I think that could be quite interesting for Canet next year. And we've always said it can be so up and down, even this year, which has probably been his most consistent Grand Prix season to date. And in the kind of mid to late part of the season, we've seen some real kill-offs in results. And Norman might be the slightly out there character that can properly relate to Iran next year. So yeah, very, very excited to see that combination of it.
Yeah, just complete the reports from Sky Italia in terms of what Lucia De Castro is up to. The reports are that he could be heading across for the American racing team to be Joe Roberts' crew chief for next season. We know, of course, for rather serious reasons, Joe Roberts hasn't had his customary normal crew chief through this season due to some health problems for his original crew chief at the start of the season, who we continue to wish all the very best. Here is your new session leader, Mario Aggi. 40.268 he should put in, which has put him half a second clear now of Dixon. Guevara currently on course to potentially retake top spot. He does. Here he is on the 28 at 140.218. Actually sick yesterday. Said he felt good from the very first lap of practice yesterday. And given what he's been through this season, of course, with the shoulder surgery, dislocated on several occasions at the start of the season, right from the Jerez test pre-Buriram, actually was having problems with his shoulder popping out, which forced him to go under the surgeon's knife following the Spanish Grand Prix. And he described the race in Indonesia as the hardest of his career for even a local or for a native in Indonesia. He found it a really tough weekend physically because, I guess, of the lack of training and this physical preparation he's been able to do with that dislocated shoulder being operated on midway through the summer. But he's getting closer to his old self once again, and he said yesterday was a really important day mentally in his attempts to rediscover the form at the start of the season, which saw him make qualifying 2 in each of the first 4 Grand Prix, and took, of course, his best Moto2 result in the wet in Austin when he finished inside the top 10.
Really impressive times this from Aggi. As Lewis was saying, probably the best Calyx in this session so far, with Dixon, Guevara and O'Toole all around him. See, Diogo Moreira has gone out and has just come straight back in again. I don't even think he has set a flying lap. No, he hasn't. Just confirming on the timing screens. Just check the weather forecast very briefly there, and I mean, not like it's tried and trusted and it's 100% accurate as regular listeners to us, Lewis, will well know, but it does say that there shouldn't be any more rain here on Phillip Island today, so with a bit of luck, this might be the only wet session that we have for the Moto2 riders, and maybe will not be the most relevant when it comes to the end of the day, the end of the weekend.
Which means that they'll be shooting in the dark to a certain extent tomorrow when they go racing here over 23 laps. When you listen to the riders yesterday, with varying reports in terms of the tyre life, Diogo Moreira said he's not concerned at all about tyre management. He feels the tyres of which they are a step harder here this weekend than we'd see at most Grand Prix on the calendar. We have the hardest available rear tyre here, in addition to a development of the medium rear tyre, which was used back at the Saxon Ring to cope with the very specific demands of that circuit. And it's a circuit here too where the left-hand side of the tyre takes particularly a pounding, especially through those final left-handers in Sector 4. But by contrast to that, Cedar Aegis, he said that you need to be very, very accurate when the tyre starts to drop around about half distance in the Grand Prix, around about lap 10, 11 or 12 or so. Here is Senna on screens. So you really need to be very, very precise, very careful to make sure that you don't overstress the left-hand side of that rear tyre. Something we have seen in all classes of Grand Prix racing here at Phillip Island, when the tyre does drop, it drops severely.
Yeah, you just have to think back to 2023 MotoGP race here when Jorge Martin dropped in pace. It really did fall off the cliff, and he was just absolutely powerless to prevent that gaggle of four riders behind from swallowing him up in one lap. Great success, and great to see MotoGP tomorrow. It does seem as though there's going to be a real mix of strategies out there. We'll be coming on to that a little bit more when MotoGP P2 comes up just after this one. That for Untitled Chapter yards. We'll be talking you through that one. You can see on the screens that his potential fastest times from Ethan Guevara, Jake Dixon will be taking a bit of a pounding in laps to come, not least from Marcos Ramirez.
Yeah, I do wonder whether Ramirez has put some slicks on at the end of this session, because he was 2 seconds up through the halfway stage. He's then lost a second and a half through sector 3, potentially where there's a very fine dry line through some of the faster corners. Let's look at Ramirez. It looks like he's got a slip on the front of that tyre as he comes towards you. Second place for the 24. He keeps himself on the dry tarmac. They just build and build and build in the 4 minutes that remain, which should be the time for 3 laps for him. Dixon into the 38s now as he takes over from Guevara. 1:38.935. 20 riders have set a lap time in this session at the moment. Joe Roberts, who was one of those who stayed longest in the pits, has now joined the session.
It doesn't look as though Diogo Moreira has any intention of going out. And again, like I said, for Senna Ages, who we just saw on our screens, Dixon still got a nice bit of scratching to the bodywork on the right-hand side when he tipped off down at the MG hairpin, but thankfully his speed at all, as you can see, towards the end of the section. This will be quite a bit of confidence boosting from Ethan Guevara as he comes round. You can see he picks up the rear tyre just flicking off as he applies the throttle. Guevara, who didn't quite meld with his track yesterday as comfortably as he was doing so in Indonesia, this could potentially give him a bit of a boost before qualifying later.
This then descends into the hairpin of turn 10, which caught him out earlier on, safely through this time. Ramirez has to be on slicks, given that he's 2 seconds and change up. Arbolino also going very, very well up behind Ramirez. As you pointed out, Neil, just to my right, pointing to the screens and pointing at the rear tyre of Ramirez, which is certainly giving him plenty of grip as he gets us down to the 135s. 3 seconds clear of Dixon, with the added benefit of some dry weather tyres. Arbolino into second.
It's going to be a big relief, I think, to some MotoGP riders that will be looking to do some longer runs. Maybe some of the medium tyres that Michelin have brought here. Looking at Pecco Bagnaia in particular, who had a real up and down day yesterday, with these Moto2 riders using slicks right at the end of the session. This is another one that's probably stuck some slicks on. Proprietor of the American racing team. Just keeping it nice and steady there through the hay shed. You don't want to be making any kind of mistakes through there, as we saw from Max Quiles earlier today in Moto3. Real fast get off from the American racing riders. Not on slicks as it stands, and Ramirez is really putting some fence in to his adversaries at the end of this session.
Conditions are sort of on that crossover point as they are now between dry and wet. It's all about tyre temperature. When you have the slicks on, you want to build up as much temperature as you can. Of course, the more temperature you build, the more the tyres are going to grip into the surface. If you're on the wet tyres, you want to try and keep the tyres cool and stop the temperatures from going up through the roof, because they're just going to burn up and you're going to lose the tread blocks of those tyres, and they're not going to be clearing the water away and giving you that grip that you require on a predominantly dry surface, which is why in drying conditions, when they're on wet tyres, you often see them going over onto the wet part of the track. Arbolino then down to a 34.0 now. It's just ahead of Ramirez, so we're under 4 seconds now away from the lap times they were doing yesterday. Arbolino was the second fastest at Boscoscuro yesterday, saying that they made a big step forward at Blue Crew Park with his Boscoscuro. Fair to say that Mandalika wasn't Arbolino's most enjoyable weekend, in part down to an incident at turn 1, which dropped into the back of the field. But Arbolino, having made some obvious clear progress from Pisano and Pategi, where he finished both races inside the top 10, looks like he's in the mood for another top 10 challenge, if not better here.
Definitely does seem so. Came into this weekend saying that that right arm, which has been giving him so many problems this year, is finally healed and back to full strength after he had surgery to alleviate some arm pain. just after the race at Misano in September. So yesterday with Arbolino's times. Hard to believe that it's 2 years ago, 2 full years ago since Tony Arbolino last won a Moto2 race. It of course came at that rain-affected, weather-affected Grand Prix in 2023. He managed to keep it upright right at the front in those awful conditions in the race that was red flagged early. Just horrible, dark and rainy. It was also very, very windy indeed. Being on top of Moto2 since then, unfortunately, but it was good to see him getting back towards his best at the tail end of this season. I do believe that he has signed a deal to move across to Fantic next year to replace the Arco Aaron Canet. But one or two holds up with the fact that he has actually got maybe a 2-year deal with Yamaha, and they're trying to find a way in which he can exit that and move across from the Blue Crew squad into Fantic Racing. So he looks on with a smile. Obviously, the seeing GP riders' chances in these kinds of conditions here at the Phillip Island circuit. Antoine Turpin rubbing his hands together.
So Arbolino, Ramirez, and Roberts, your top three. Session slick tyres. You can just see the corner of the picture there. Like the intact bikes. Center Aegis and Manuel Gonzalez. Hunting down our screen, set a time in that session. Gonzalez did, but it was the slowest of all the riders who did go out there and register a time. Manuel Gonzalez 22nd in that session. Perhaps not taking the ultimate risks in conditions like this when, as mentioned earlier on, there's plenty to lose, potentially when you are leading the World Championship. Cervantes was fourth. He was late out onto the track from Anchi, Hickman, Guevara, Lopez, Munoz and Huertas, whose dent on this session unfortunately came at the expense of one of the local seagulls here in Phillip Island, which saw that red flag come out a little bit earlier on. I didn't see much from Aegis in that session. The 81 just goes through the picture there ahead of Marcos Ramirez. There's every reason why the thousands who are packing into Phillip Island this morning should be very excited about Senna's prospects here this weekend. Qualifying though this afternoon is going to be so crucial for Senna. I've seen quite often this season he's qualified perhaps lower than his ultimate potential suggests that he should be. Senna can get himself on the front 2 rows here this afternoon. You feel he's got a real chance of home victory tomorrow. With Tony Arbolino, who topped this morning's mixed conditions FP2. Arbolino, Ramirez and Roberts all putting slicks on at the end to take the top 3 spot. Barry Baltas fourth from Mario Anchi and Jake Dixon, who looked sick after crashing at 10. Ivan Guevara 7th from Alonso Lopez, Dani Munoz, and the enemy of the Seagulls, Adrian Huertas. Ivan Ortola 11th from Alex Escridge, Danny Holgado and Tonto Van de Gorba. Colin Vaya 15th, headed Yuki Kuni, Yuki Sasaki, Jorge Navarro and Celestino Vietti. Harrison Boyd at the end took P20 from David Alonso and points leader Manu Gonzalez. The 6 other riders, all different set of time, which includes yesterday's pace setters Diogo Moreira and Senna Aegis. But it's Tony Arbolino who tops the free practice 2 session in Moto2, which started on wet and ended on slicks. We'll be on slicks in MotoGP in just a moment. Their free practice 2 session is moments away.
morning and welcome back to Australia. What a beautiful shot that is. The spectacular coastline of the nearby Bass Strait, which flanks this spectacular coastal Phillip Island circuit. We've already had a bit of a mixed bag in terms of the weather this morning, a bit of breeze, as we always get here in Phillip Island. Moto3 and Moto2's early morning practice sessions were both disrupted by a little bit of rain. Wildlife red flag as well coming in the earlier Moto2 session, but thankfully with that bit of breeze around, the track surface here was drying up rather rapidly. It looks like, fingers crossed all being well, we're going to get a full dry MotoGP FP2 over half an hour coming up shortly, and then of course two dramatic qualifying sessions, Q1 and Q2, both 15-minute affairs to decide who will be on our pole position number 19 in 2025. Despite some concerns about maybe the need to tweak the race schedule here this weekend with some very blustery conditions predicted for Phillip Island tomorrow morning, we are good to go as per the planned schedule. So set your watches to 3 p.m. local time this afternoon. We'll be lights out for the 13-lap Tissot sprint. And we're hoping for a full race day of Grand Prix action here tomorrow. Friday started fantastically well in Phillip Island, didn't it, for Aprilia? Marco Bezzecchi with a destroying all-time lap record of 126.492, leading the way for the factory Aprilia squad ahead of Raul Fernandez on the trackhouse Aprilia. Going straight through to Q2, Di Gianantonio, Quattararo, the two Fabios, third and fourth respectively. Alex Marquez looking to seal second place in the World Championship, fifth ahead of Alex Rins. Both factory Yamahas inside the top six. Marini, Polis, Spargaro, the top KTM, replacing Maverick Vinales in eighth, ahead of Bagnaia and Acosta. Our most recent winner, Fermin Aldeguer, successive poles in his three previous visits to Phillip Island Moto2. Well, he's got to go through Q1, having missed out on a direct place in Q2 by just 0.005 of a second. With no Marc Marquez, sadly,